Snow hammered Mason's windows as the lights flickered, one candle holding my half-empty table while Rusty pressed into my knee, staring at me instead of the storm. My date talked about escaping this town, but the dog who had sat through long nights beside strangers refused to move, as if he knew I was about to leave more than a meal behind. To understand why he chose my table that night, we have to go back to the quiet weeks when life on our street felt ordinary and Rusty was only the neighbour's dog at my door. The funny thing is, by the time we got to that Christmas Eve table with the candles and the dog staring at me, my life already felt half taken apart. A month earlier, the restaurant was just a place I passed on my drive home from the high school. Rusty's golden fur still clung to my black winter coat from watching Lily after choir practice. I remember brushing at the hair, feeling oddly claimed by a dog that wasn't mine. That afternoon, the sky over town was the colour of tin, low and undecided between snow and rain. I carried a stack of music folders into my classroom, listening to the distant thump of a basketball in the gym and a dog barking outside. It was Rusty, of course, impatient in Mark's truck while he finished a winter tire appointment. Even muffled by brick, his bark always sounded like he was calling someone back. The external jolt came as I was erasing the whiteboard. My phone buzzed with a message from Denise. Our school secretary. You still good for that Christmas Eve blind date? He confirmed. I stared at the screen, Rusty's bark echoing faintly through the window. I had said yes weeks ago, before the nights started feeling so unbearably long. Now the idea of pretending to sparkle for a stranger made my chest tighten. I set the phone down, told myself not to overthink it, and started straightening folding chairs for the winter concert. In the hallway, Lily's giggle floated past like a little bell. She was telling someone about how Rusty knew when people were about to be sad, and my name drifted in and out of the story. I paused behind the door, surprised, feeling as if the dog had just turned his head in my direction. That evening, home felt smaller than usual. I heated a can of soup and listened to the radiators hiss in my old rental house, the kind with sloping floors and a stubborn front door. Through the thin walls, I heard Rusty's paws hitting Mark's porch next door, then Lily's small boots clumping after him. My own porch light flickered once and went steady again, like it was undecided about welcoming anyone. On the coffee table, an envelope from my ex-husband sat half opened. I finally read the card inside. He and his new wife were expecting. Thought you should hear it from me. Head written. The words blurred for a second. Outside, Rusty barked once, sharply, and then went quiet, as if Head checked on the neighbourhood and decided things were as they were. I folded the card back up without answering. Later, taking out the trash, I nearly tripped over Rusty stretched across the shared driveway. Mark stood by his truck, loading a cooler. his breath a pale cloud in the cold. Sorry. He thinks he owns this strip of gravel, Mark said, scratching Rusty's neck. Rusty pressed his warm side against my leg, looking up with those steady, honey-brown eyes. It felt less like a hello and more like a question. Back inside, I stared at my reflection in the dark kitchen window, phone in hand, Denise's message still unanswered. Behind my reflection, I could see, faintly, the glow of Mark's living room and Rusty's silhouette crossing in front of their tree. I told myself it was just another holiday, just another awkward date to get through. Still, as I turned off the light, I couldn't shake the sense that the dog knew something I didn't. The next week, the town slipped into its yearly performance of Christmas. Wreaths on every lamppost, the hardware store window glowing with train sets, the diner switching to red paper placemats. At school, the winter concert dominated everything. Kids hummed carols in the hallway, and glitter migrated onto every surface. Rusty started appearing more around the building, his golden head visible through classroom windows when Mark pulled up to get Lily. One morning, an icy drizzle turned the parking lot into a shallow mirror. I stepped out of my car and nearly slid, only to feel a sudden weight against my hip. Rusty had hopped down from Mark's truck and planted himself firmly beside me, blocking my path until I steadied. Guess you needed a spotter, Mark joked, closing the truck door. The dog stayed pressed to me a beat longer than seemed accidental, as if checking his work. Later that day, the guidance counsellor forwarded an email about budget cuts and potential program reductions. Choir was on the list of possible consolidations. I read it 3 times at my desk. The fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Through the window, I watched Rusty pacing politely by the main entrance while Lily waited for dismissal. She was talking to him, gesturing big with her mittens, like she was explaining something important about grown-ups. At the dress rehearsal, the gym smelled of pine branches and floor wax. Folding chairs lined up like small grey soldiers. As I guided the 5th graders onto the risers, Lily tugged my sleeve. "Miss Carter, can Rusty come to the concert?" she whispered. "He picks the right person to sit by. Daddy says he's like a feelings detective." I smiled, half listening, my eyes on a wobbly music stand. But her words lodged deep. That evening at home, a voicemail waited from Denise. "Hey, Laura, just confirming your Christmas Eve reservation at Mason's," she said. "They're holding a table by the window for you and your gentleman. They're excited, you know. They love couples on holidays." I pictured the restaurant's gold-lit windows, the white tablecloth, a little candle between 2 people trying not to disappoint each other. Outside, Rusty barked at a passing snowplow, protective and sure. 2 days before the concert, a snowstorm warning crawled along the bottom of the local news screen. I watched it from my couch, bowl of reheated pasta in my lap, Rusty's shadow flickering on my blinds whenever he crossed Mark's yard. The meteorologist stressed travel advisories for Christmas Eve, mentioning Masons by name as a place folks might have to bundle up extra to reach. It was the first time the date felt like something that might actually happen. The night of the concert, the gym filled with parents in heavy coats and the sweet chaos of kids in crooked Santa hats. Midway through Silent Night, I spotted Rusty near the far wall, lying calmly by Lily and Mark's feet. He wasn't restless at all. He was scanning the crowd, eyes moving from face to face. When our gaze met across the sea of folding chairs, I felt a strange jolt, like Head been looking for someone specific and finally found them. After the applause died and the last programs were tossed into recycling bins, I thanked Mark for bringing Lily and, by extension, Rusty. He likes to work, Mark said, resting a hand on the dog's back. Funny thing, though on big nights like this, he always picks one person, sticks to them if they're falling apart a little, even if they don't admit it yet. Rusty leaned against my leg as he said it. I laughed it off, but on the drive home, the question hummed quietly. What did the dog see when he looked at me? The weekend before Christmas, the town slowed to that peculiar half speed where everyone was busy but no one went far. I woke to the sound of Rusty's collar jingling next door and the faint scrape of Mark shoveling their side of the sidewalk. Snow had finally decided to fall for real. Soft and determined. It made my little house feel cozy, but also isolated, like a snow globe forgotten at the back of a shelf. I carried coffee out onto my porch, bundled in an old cardigan. Rusty trotted over, leaving neat paw prints on the steps, and sat like a sentinel at my feet. You checking the perimeter? I asked, scratching behind his ears. He sighed, leaning heavily against my leg. Mark straightened up, leaning on his shovel. He used to do this at the firehouse, he said. After bad calls, He'd just sit with whoever needed it until they could stand up again. That was how I learned Rusty hadn't always been just a neighbour's pet. In his younger years, He'd been part of a therapy dog program tied to the county fire department. Mark had been a firefighter back then, before the knee injury and the line of duty accident that took his wife. He started choosing folks on his own. Mark said quietly. Didn't always make sense at the time. Later it did. Rusty's head rested on my slipper like an exclamation point. Hearing it, my own past came into sharper focus. Before I moved back here, Id lived in a city condo with stainless steel appliances and a calendar full of plans. We'd tried for a baby, then mourned quietly when it didn't happen. My husband had thrown himself into work. I had thrown myself into students. When the marriage finally cracked, it did so almost politely, papers signed, furniture divided. The silence afterward, though, had been anything but polite. I hadn't planned on returning to my hometown. Then a position opened at the high school, and my mother's arthritis worsened, and the cost of staying gone began to outweigh the cost of coming back. I took the job, rented the little blue house near Mark's place, and told myself it was temporary. Years later, my boxes were still half unpacked in the attic, as if I might leave midweek without warning. Rusty was the first neighbour to act like I lived here for real. We crossed paths more after that porch conversation. At the grocery store, I'd spot him in Mark's truck, nose pressed to the cracked window, watching the entrance like he had a list of people he hoped to see. Once, leaving the pharmacy with my mother's prescriptions in a brown paper bag, I found Rusty waiting by the automatic doors. Lily explained he was on patrol, making sure people remembered to breathe. He nudged my hand, and I realized my fist had been clenched around the bag. One evening, Mum called from her apartment across town, voice tight. Her doctor wanted to increase her medication. She was worried about the side effects and about becoming more trouble to me. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, the weight of responsibility stretching out like an unploughed road. From outside came the unmistakable thump of Rusty hopping down off Mark's porch, followed by a scratch at my front door that sounded oddly deliberate. I opened it to find him sitting squarely on the mat, snow dusting his whiskers, breath puffing in quick clouds. He had no business being there. Mark appeared a moment later, slightly out of breath. "Sorry," he said. Door didn't latch. He made a beeline. Rusty didn't try to go back, though he looked from Mark to me, then stepped forward, nose nudging my knee, like head heard more than he should have through the thin winter air. That night, after they left, I stood at the bedroom window, watching Rusty settle under the glow of Mark's living room lamp. Lily lay on the floor beside him, colouring, her small hand resting on his flank. It struck me, with a sudden ache, that their little household had been rearranged by loss and stitched back together by this dog who refused to let anyone sit alone in the dark. I wondered what mark I was carrying that he kept touching with his presence. By the time Christmas week officially began, the days had blurred into one long ribbon of concerts, parent emails, and grocery runs for my mother. The blind date at Mason's sat on my calendar like something from a different life, a plan made by a version of me who still believed in clean starts. Rusty's increased attention, his watchful eyes, his insistence on walking between me and icy patches felt like a quiet commentary. I just didn't know what he was trying to say. The Monday before Christmas Eve, the sky cleared into one of those sharp blue days that make snowbanks glitter like someone spilled sugar everywhere. At school, the students were half feral with anticipation, backpacks sagging with wrapped gifts for teachers. I spent my planning period sorting thank you mugs when Denise popped her head into my classroom, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Mason's called again," she said. "They're holding that table. You still on for the date?" I hesitated, fingers wrapped around a mug that read "Best Choir Director Ever" in glittery gold. Outside, Rusty trotted along the sidewalk, keeping pace with Lily's skipping feet as Mark walked them toward town. "Yes," I heard myself say. "Tell them it will be there." Denise grinned, relieved. When she left, I watched the little trio pass the music room window, the dog glancing toward the building as if checking my answer. That evening, the town held its annual tree lighting on the square. It was one of those traditions that never changed. Hot chocolate in styrofoam cups, carols over a slightly tinny PA, the mayor in his too-thin coat. I went mostly out of habit, bundled in my red scarf. The cold bit through my boots as I stood near the back, humming along with the crowd, watching my breath rise into the darkness like smoke. I spotted Rusty before I saw Lily or Mark. His golden coat caught the light from the lampposts, a moving patch of warmth in the crowd. He threaded through clusters of people, tail at a polite half-wag, checking on small children and elderly knees. When he saw me, he changed course, beelining toward where I stood near the steps of the courthouse. Without asking permission, he pressed his head firmly against my thigh and stayed there. "Looks like he's chosen his spot," Mark said when he and Lily caught up. Lily slipped her hand into mine, small and surprisingly sure. "He picks the person who needs someone most," she informed me solemnly. "Last year it was Mr. Powell. When his wife was in the hospital, he wouldn't leave him alone all night." Rusty huffed softly, eyes closed, as if in agreement with his own reputation. Heat rose behind my eyes for no good reason. When the mayor began the countdown and the tree blinked to life, the crowd erupted in that small-town cheer that's half genuine, half performance. Beside me, Rusty shifted, leaning more weight against me, his paw resting lightly on my boot. As people clapped and phones came out for photos, I found myself watching the dog instead of the lights. The thought arrived, uninvited. If he was right about people, what did my being chosen say? On the walk back toward our street, the square emptied into side roads like streams returning to a river. Mark fell into step beside me while Lily ran ahead with two classmates. Denise told me you're braving Masons on Christmas Eve, he said. That's big of you. I laughed, my breath clouding in front of us. Big or foolish, I said. I'm not sure which. Rusty walked between us, occasionally bumping my hand with his nose. We paused at the corner where our roads split. Snow crunched under our boots. The air carried the distant smell of wood smoke. For what it's worth, Mark added, nodding toward Rusty. If he decides he doesn't like the guy, that's usually the end of it. Hez got a record. I rolled my eyes, but the remark landed somewhere tender. As I crossed to my house, Rusty whined once, watching until I turned my key in the lock. Later that night, laying out clothes for the date, I caught sight of myself in the dresser mirror. Not young, not old, just somewhere in the middle, with laugh lines partially earned and partially forced. I held up the red dress I hadn't worn since my sister's wedding, wondering if it would read as festive or desperate. From next door came the muffled sound of Lily's bedtime story and a soft thump as Rusty settled at her feet. His presence was like a heartbeat through the wall. I slipped the dress onto a hanger by the closet, turned off the bedroom light, and stood in the dark for a moment, listening. Somewhere deep in the quiet, a dog's collar jingled, then went still. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would sit at a table with a stranger and try to act as if my life were not being quietly redirected by a golden retriever with opinions. Hope fluttered, small and uncertain, in my chest. Christmas Eve dawned hushed and pale, the kind of morning that makes even traffic noise sound respectful. My mother called early, worrying about the weather and reminding me not to waste a good dress on a bad man. I promised to stop by after church and bring her leftover pie from Mason's, though I doubted it'd stay long enough for dessert. Rusty barked once outside, as if registering his dissent with my low expectations. By afternoon, the storm the meteorologist had threatened finally arrived. Snowflakes thickened from polite dusting to serious curtains, blurring the view of Main Street from my kitchen window. The radio advised caution on county roads. The anchor mentioned that Masons would remain open for brave souls and reserved romantic dinners. I ironed the red dress anyway, the hiss of steam sinking with the radiator, aware of Rusty's intermittent patrols past my front steps. I arrived at the restaurant just as the early darkness pressed in. Masons glowed like a lantern in the snow. Windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. My blind date, Tom, stood in the vestibule, removing his gloves. Exactly on time and exactly as average as his email profile had suggested. Nice smile. Nervous eyes. A tie that tried too hard. We shook hands, exchanged the usual holiday pleasantries, and followed the host to a small table near the front window. At first, everything was politely fine. The candle between us cast flattering shadows. Soft jazz versions of carols played overhead. We ordered, commented on the weather, and compared small-town childhoods. But as the conversation veered toward future plans, a fissure opened. Tom spoke excitedly about relocating to a bigger city, chasing promotions, leaving these sleepy winters behind. I heard myself offering neutral sounds, while inside, something recoiled. Rusty's absence at my side felt louder than the clink of cutlery. Halfway through the main course, the storm knocked the lights out for 3 long seconds. The room inhaled together, then exhaled when the generator kicked in, leaving everything a little dimmer, more intimate. Outside, car tires hissed cautiously on the slush. Inside, a murmur rippled through the diners, a shared fragility. I found my hand gripping the edge of the tablecloth, imagining my mother alone in her apartment, the school budget email, my half-unpacked boxes. It was in that softened, nervous silence that I heard the distinct jingle of a familiar collar and the hushed surprise of a child saying, "Look, Daddy, it's her." I turned toward the entrance and saw a dusting of snow swirl in as the door opened. Mark stepped inside, cheeks reddened by the cold, Lily at his side in her little blue coat, and Rusty trotting in between them, fur sparkling with melted flakes. Heads turned as they stamped snow from their boots. The hostess met them, clearly expecting this trio. Masons had invited Rusty as a kind of unofficial therapy dog for the evening, a gesture to make the holiday softer for folks, as the owner had said on the radio earlier. I watched as they conferred quietly, then began making a slow circuit around the room. Greeting tables. Rusty moved with calm purpose, pausing by widowed Mrs. Anders, offering her a gentle muzzle bump, then weaving past couples locked in their own conversations. As they drew closer to our table, I felt a strange tightening in my chest, like waiting for exam results. Tom kept talking about a condo head toured in Chicago. Oblivious. Mark's gaze flicked toward me. A quick question, then back to Lily. Rusty, however, had already made his decision. Instead of stopping at the table of college kids or the family with toddlers, he veered sharply, planting himself at my side with a soft thump, pressing his shoulder firmly against my chair. Conversations in the immediate vicinity slowed, then dipped. I could feel eyes on us, the way small-town rooms do when something unscripted happens. Lily tugged Mark's hand, pointing directly at me, mirroring the moment I'd later see frozen in the thumbnail. Her wide-eyed certainty, my startled expression, Rusty's steady, knowing gaze. It felt like the whole restaurant inhaled again, waiting to see if this was just a cute dog trick or something heavier. Tom blinked, finally noticing the golden wall of fur that had appeared beside me. Is this your dog?" he asked, half amused, half annoyed at the disruption. "No," I said slowly, one hand finding Rusty's red Christmas scarf, fingers sinking into familiar warmth. "He just lives next door." Mark stood a respectful distance away, but his eyes were kind, steady. "He tends to sit where he's needed," he offered quietly to Tom, as if explaining a weather pattern. The pressure in the room deepened, not hostile, just attentive. People who knew Rusty's reputation exchanged looks. Others just smiled, sensing a story they didn't yet understand. The candle between us sputtered slightly, then steadied again. Rusty's weight against my leg anchored me more than the chair did. In that moment, with snow stacking against the windows and every fork in the room paused mid-air, it became painfully clear. My Christmas date was quietly falling apart, and everyone, including the dog, could see it. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The only sound was the soft clink of a spoon in a far corner and the low hum of the generator. Then Lily, fueled by the absolute confidence only 6-year-olds seem to have, gently pulled Mark closer to our table. "Daddy," she whispered loud enough to carry to the nearest diners Rusty picked her. Like he picked Mr. Powell. "Doesn't that mean something?" Her eyes shone, fixed on me as if I were the one in danger of bolting. I felt the colour rise in my cheeks, aware of Tom shifting uncomfortably across from me. Well, maybe he just likes the smell of my dinner. I tried, aiming for lightness. Rusty answered by ignoring my plate completely, instead resting his chin on my knee and looking up at me with that deep, measuring gaze. It was the same look Head given me at the tree lighting, at the icy parking lot, on my front porch after Mum's phone call. It was not casual. Mark cleared his throat, the corner of his mouth twitching. "We can make a lap and come back," he offered quietly, giving me an out. Before I could respond, Tom spoke up, forcing a short laugh. "Honestly, this is a bit much," he said. "I mean, it's sweet and all, but we were in the middle of a conversation about plans." "Right." His emphasis on the word plans landed heavy, like a door closing. Rusty's ears flicked, as if Head heard a wrong note. Something in me, stretched thin for months, gave way, not with drama, but with a quiet, decisive snap. I looked from Tom's earnest, impatient face to Mark's careful neutrality, then down at the dog who had, by all accounts, never chosen wrong. Outside, snow pressed against the glass like a crowd trying to listen in. I'm not sure our plans line up. Tom, I said, voice soft but clear. At least not in the way you mean. The room didn't gasp. This wasn't a movie. But there was a subtle shift, a loosening. A nearby older couple glanced over with small, understanding smiles. The hostess, polishing glasses at the bar, paused and then looked away, giving us privacy while still keeping Rusty in her peripheral vision. Tom frowned, hurt and annoyed. So that's it. The dog decides, he asked. His words had more bite than he probably intended, but they stung anyway. No, I answered, resting my hand more firmly on Rusty's neck. The last few months decide. Coming home decides. My mum, my students, my neighbours. I swallowed. The dog just seems to be better at seeing where I already am. Rusty leaned into my hand, as if agreeing. Lily's shoulders relaxed. She squeezed Mark's fingers like she'd been holding her breath. Somewhere behind us, a fork clinked back onto a plate. Conversation cautiously resuming. Tom sighed, leaning back. Well, he said stiffly, I hope you and your community dog have a great holiday. He signalled for the check, insisting on splitting the bill. It was not the catastrophe he'd feared, just a small, sad untangling under soft lights. When he left, the bell over the door jingled, sending a gust of cold air across the room. Rusty watched him go, then turned back to me with what I could have sworn was relief. Mark waited until the door closed behind Tom before stepping closer, stopping at a respectful distance from the table. We can leave you be, he said gently. He just wouldn't budge once he saw you were here. Sometimes he gets ideas about people. Behind him, Lily bounced on her toes, her red hairband askew. We were supposed to go table to table, she confided. But Rusty said we had to start with you. I laughed then, a startled sound that carried more release than amusement. Well, I guess we ruined his route. I said, I'm sorry if he caused trouble. Mark shook his head. Honestly, this is tame. Once he pulled me across a hospital lobby because he spotted a guy sitting alone by the vending machines. Turned out he'd just gotten news about his brother. Rusty parked there for an hour. The nurses brought them both blankets. The waitress, balancing a tray of desserts, stopped by our table with a conspiratorial smile. House pie, she offered. On us. Consider it a thank you to Rusty for working the room. She set down 3 plates instead of 1, then slipped Lily a sugar cookie shaped like a bone. Around us, the restaurant's tension softened into that shared, gentle curiosity that small towns do so well. No one stared overtly, but people watched in that kind, sideways way. We ended up sliding another chair to the table. Lily took over my abandoned water glass for her apple juice. Mark sat angled slightly away, as if prepared to leave at any time if I seemed uncomfortable. Rusty positioned himself between us, broad head resting where my knee and Mark's boot nearly met. We talked not about grand plans, but about caroling routes, snow shovels, the challenge of keeping Lily's mittens paired. It felt less like a dramatic turning point and more like a door quietly opening that had been stuck for years. When the meal wound down, Mark offered me a ride home. Given the deepening snow, I hesitated, then accepted. Outside, the parking lot was a soft, unmarked field. As we stepped carefully toward his truck, Rusty walked just ahead, testing each patch of ground. Lily chattered about how next year Rusty would probably pick someone else who doesn't know they're sad yet. I slipped once, catching myself on the side of the truck. Rusty immediately doubled back, leaning against my leg until I had both feet steady. On the drive home, the town looked different, not transformed, just more in focus. Lights in windows, a kid's bike half buried in snow, the glow from the church's midnight service that we were passing too early to attend. Rusty's warm breath fogged the rear window. Lily's head nodded against his side. Mark's hands rested easy on the wheel. You know, he said quietly, eyes on the road. He's never dragged us to the wrong table yet. I didn't answer. I just watched the snow and let the truth of that settle. The days between Christmas and New Year's always feel unmoored, like the town is exhaling after holding everything up for weeks. School was out, my lesson plans mercifully asleep in a folder on the counter. I spent the first morning cleaning pine needles from the living room rug. The faint scent of Mason's apple pie still lingering in my coat. Through the front window, I saw Rusty sitting on Mark's porch, nose lifted as if checking the weather for all of us. An external nudge came in the form of an email. The district had decided, for now, not to cut choir. Community feedback was strong. The superintendent wrote, "Well, reassess next year." Attached were scanned notes from parents and students, handwritten scrawls of gratitude. One postcard, addressed only to the music lady, showed a drawing of a golden dog with music notes around his head. I didn't need the signature to know Lily's blocky letters. Our routines shifted almost without discussion. Mark started dropping Lily at my house some afternoons so he could take on extra work at the shop. Rusty bounded in with her, making a beeline for his preferred spot by the radiator. Lily did her reading practice aloud, one hand always tangled in his fur. He keeps the scary parts from sticking, she explained. Matter of fact, eventually, I noticed my shoulders stayed lower on those days, as if someone had turned down the town's overall volume. One clear, brittle, cold afternoon, we took Rusty for a walk along the river path at the edge of town. The water ran dark and quick between crusts of ice. The air smelled of clean metal and distant wood smoke. Lily skipped ahead, pockets bulging with found rocks. Rusty trotted mostly at my side, brush of his shoulder against my coat, a steady metronome. He used to do this with the guys at the firehouse after rough nights. Mark said, "Walk until the world felt shaped again." We talked about smaller things. Favourite sandwich orders at the diner. The best time of day to grocery shop without running into half your congregation or all your students. At one point, Mark stopped and looked out over the river, his breath visible. "I used to think the big city was where you had to be to matter," he said. Then I watched Rusty work these rooms, church basements, hospital lobbies. Now Masons and I realized the hardest rescues are usually the quiet ones. Rusty bumped his hand as if seconding it. One evening, my mother came over for dinner, her cane tapping gently on the porch steps. She'd been wary of dogs since a childhood bite, but Rusty approached her with unusual delicacy, stopping at a distance and waiting. She studied him, then extended a tentative hand. He stepped forward, offering his head for a careful pat, then retreated to lie near her chair without crowding. "Hez polite," she pronounced, which for my mother was high praise. Something softened in her eyes seeing him tuck himself into our small circle. As New Year's approached, Masons posted a photo on their social page. Rusty in his red scarf, Lily holding his leash. Snowflakes caught mid-fall in the lamplight outside the restaurant. I recognized my own red dress in the background, slightly blurred, but undeniably there. The caption read, "Sometimes the best holiday miracles just look like neighbours finding each other." The post collected quiet likes from people I saw weekly at the grocery store, the bank, the pharmacy. Our small turning point had become a gentle town story. On the last night before school started again, I stood on my porch with a mug of tea, watching the breath of the town rise into the cold. Across the way, Mark wrestled a new smoke detector into place on his front door frame while Lily held the step stool. Rusty sat at the bottom like a foreman, head tilted. When they finished, Mark caught my eye and gave a small wave. Rusty, without consulting anyone, trotted over and sat at my feet, as if fully aware that this, now, was our shared rhythm. We ended that evening with a new ritual. Lily insisting on one goodnight song on my old piano while Rusty dozed beneath the keys. Mark listened from the doorway, leaning on the frame, the house lights soft behind him. After they left, the quiet that remained felt different, less like something pressing in, more like a space that had been intentionally left for rest. I realized, lying in bed later, that for the first time in years, I was not planning my escape. Winter loosened its grip slowly, in the way it always does here, bicycles shortening drip by drip, snowbanks retreating to reveal forgotten leaves and lost mittens. Life settled into its new pattern with such gentleness that, had I not been paying attention, I might have missed how different it was from the year before. Rusty's fur was a constant in my days now, a golden thread weaving between school, home, and Mark's front steps. An external reminder of all that had changed came in the form of a letter from an old city colleague, describing her fast-paced life, promotions, travel, the constant thrill and exhaustion. I read it at my kitchen table while Rusty snored lightly beneath my feet and Lily coloured at the counter, waiting for Mark to finish a late shift. Once, that letter would have filled me with restless envy. Now, I folded it carefully and tucked it away, grateful and a little surprised at my own lack of longing. Spring choir rehearsals brought fresh faces and new songs. After school, a rotating crew of students began stopping by to read to Rusty, who bore the attention with patient grace. "Hez like a furry metronome," one boy said. "Keeps me from rushing." Watching them, I thought about all the rooms Head worked over the years, all the people Head quietly chosen. The night at Mason's slipped into that lineage in my mind, not an exception, but a fulfillment. On a soft, rainy evening, nearly a year after that Christmas date, we found ourselves back at Mason's, not for a blind date this time, but for a modest community benefit dinner. The same hostess greeted us. The same candlelight painted our faces gold. Lily chatted about middle school options. Mark teased me about my allegiance to the alto section. Rusty lay between us, muzzle gone a little whiter, eyes as keen as ever. The restaurant hummed around our small, steady table, driving home through streets that now felt unquestionably mine. Rusty's head resting on my shoulder from the back seat. I thought about all the ways a life can be rescued without sirens or headlines. A dog choosing a table, a child tugging her father's hand, a neighbour knocking before you quite know you need company. When we pulled into our driveways, side by side, and stepped out into the quiet night, the words came easily, true all the way down. I'm glad we found each other. I'm not alone anymore. If this story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments to let us know you were here. Your support keeps these gentle stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that finds you when you least expect it.